We crept through the gate of the Sunnydale Nursing Home, only to be met by another sign. This one was larger than the first and had lots of words written on it, but there were only 3 that mattered to us at the moment. 3 little words near the bottom. No animals allowed. "Well, Pop," said Howie, "there's your omen." "More obstacle than omen," Chester muttered. Then, seeing the forlorn look in Hamlet's eyes, he added, "And an obstacle is nothing more than a victory waiting to happen." I recognized Chester's statement as one of the many he'd been quoting ever since finishing that recent bestseller, "Everything I Always Wanted to Be, I Already Am." I wondered if the weasel had read it too. It seemed like his kind of book. "I appreciate the sentiment," Hamlet said, "but I don't see how—" "All we need is a plan," Chester said. Howie ran to a nearby rock garden and pulled out a fern by its roots. "Here," he said, presenting it proudly to Chester. "That's plan, Howie, not plant." "Oh. Keep that up and we'll be bounced out of here before you can say, 'Open window.'" We all turned at the sound of Felony's voice. "There's an open window over there by the parking lot," she said. "We're making our way under the cars, see? Then it's a dash and a leap, and we're in." "Not a bad plan," Chester said, squinting his eyes and nodding approval. "With a little help, it'll be better than not bad. It'll be good." Felony and Misdemeanor scowled. I had the feeling they weren't used to having their plans improved upon. But Chester wasn't used to having someone else come up with the plan in the first place. "The problem is we don't know what's on the other side of that window," he went on. "Now the hedge underneath will make an excellent hiding place while one of us gets up on Hamlet's or Harold's back and checks out the interior. The only other problem is how we get to the window without being seen." "I told you," said Felony, gritting her teeth. "We skedaddle under the cars." "But some of us aren't going to fit," Chester pointed out, with a nod toward Hamlet and me. "I've got it," said Howie. "We'll disguise ourselves. That's what they do in the movies. Okay, it's a nursing home, right? So let's make ourselves look like nurses. First, we need those little white hats. Oh, wait, I've got a better idea. We could pretend we're delivering pizza." "Excellent idea, Howie," said Chester, rolling his eyes. "Maybe you could write it up and submit it in triplicate, Meanwhile, the rest of us will try to come up with an alternative." "Okay, Pop," Howie said. "Just let me give this some thought," Chester said. "We need to be sure that no one sees Harold or Hamlet." Hamlet cleared his throat. "If you'll pardon my saying so, Howie's idea may be useful." Leading us to a large tree, he indicated a pile of cut-down branches. "In Shakespeare's play Macbeth," he told us, "an army disguises itself with the branches of a tree. We could do the same thing. If anyone spots us, we could just stand still and we'd look like—" "A bunch of branches with furry feet and tails," said Misdemeanor. "That's the stupidest idea I ever heard." "Now wait a minute," said Chester. "It just might work. After all, a bunch of branches is less likely to raise suspicion than a bunch of animals on the loose." We nodded our heads. All except Howie, that is, who was too busy trying to figure out what triplicate meant. And so, with branches clenched firmly between our teeth, we set out across the parking lot, looking like a cross between an Arbor Day parade and a very strange family of deer with sprouted antlers. We got close enough to the window so that we could see some movement on the other side when suddenly a door opened and a man and woman burst out. We froze. Looking out across the parking lot, the man said, "Listen, Helen, it's all well and good that you want to humor him, but this is a waste of time." "It may be, George," said the woman, "but he is mentally sound. If he said he saw— what was it he said again? Burnin' would come to Dunsinane, whatever that means. Why, George, it's from Shakespeare. You know how Archie loves to quote from Shakespeare." I heard Hamlet gasp. "Archie," he said weakly. "That's just it," said the man named George. "He loves to quote from Shakespeare. That doesn't mean we have to drop everything and run out here just because he saw a bunch of trees move. He was probably daydreaming about the good old days and—" The woman placed her hand on the man's arm and he stopped speaking. She pointed in our direction. I gulped and swallowed a little sawdust in the process. "Look," she said, "over the roof of the blue Honda. What in the world are those branches doing there?" The sawdust was tickling my throat. Hamlet, meanwhile, was starting to quiver with excitement from hearing Archie's name. Between the two of us, Burnin' Wood was getting a little shaky. "Good heavens," the woman cried. "They are moving! What is going on?" The man shook his head. "I don't have a clue," he said, "but there's one way to find out." With no more warning than that, the two of them moved briskly in our direction. Chester spat out his branch seconds before I sneezed and lost a good grip on mine. "Run for it!" he squealed. "The door!" Felony cried. "They left the door open!" We ran out from behind the parked cars and scrambled toward the open door before George and Helen knew what was happening. "Animals!" Helen cried. "Stop them!" George shouted. Several residents of the nursing home had gathered on the other side of the open door, and instead of stopping us, were cheering us on. "Look," said a woman with blue cotton candy hair. "There's a cat that looks just like my Boopsie." Felony looked up in alarm. "Boopsie," she said. "No way do I look like a Boopsie." "Boopsie! Here, Boopsie!" the woman called out after us. We raced madly down a hallway and through a door into the room with the open window. Hamlet had the lead, so it was that we all collided with him when he came to a sudden jarring stop. "Archie!" he woofed. Sitting at a table in a tattered bathrobe and faded pajamas sat an old man with a face full of whiskers and eyes full of tears. "Hamlet," he said, opening his arms. Hamlet limped to him and laid his head on the old man's knee. Just then Helen and George charged into the room. "Good heavens!" cried Helen when she saw us. "Where did all these animals come from?" "Out!" George yelled, waving his hands in the air. "Go home! All of you, go home!" The woman with cotton candy hair appeared in the doorway behind them, making clucking noises with her tongue. "Here, Boopsie," she said. She picked up a piece of bacon from one of the tables and held it out in front of her. "Nice kitty. Here, girl." Felony looked at the rest of us and licked her lips. "Hey, if she wants to call me Boopsie, who am I to stand in the way of making a little old blue-haired lady happy? Or in the way of a free breakfast, for that matter." "Oh no, we can't have that," said Helen as Felony, also known as Boopsie, purringly accepted the bacon from the old woman's hand. The old woman looked up and said, "But they're hungry, Helen." With that, one plate after another found its way from table to floor, and we were all treated to a delicious breakfast garnished with pats on the head, even the weasel, whom one woman said reminded her of the collar of her favorite coat. Helen and George tried to stop it, but it was no use. The old people were so happy to have us there that the two officials finally threw up their hands and went off to do something official elsewhere. Hamlet was the only one of us who didn't eat. He was too busy just being with Archie. "I'm sorry, old boy," Archie said. "I just couldn't bear to tell you the truth. All our travels together, all the thick and thin times, how could I tell you I was leaving you behind for good? Danged nursing home, I don't see what they got against animals anyway. But this is the only place I could afford, boy. I know. I always said I was rich, and I was, rich in spirit. But let me confide in you a little secret, dear friend. I've lost my spirit. I'm poor in every sense of the word now, Hamlet. I'm alone, and that's the worst kind of poor there is." Hamlet cocked his head and whimpered. Archie seemed to know right away what he was saying. "Willie? Oh, Willie and I haven't had a good talk in months. Oh, sure, he's here, but we just don't have anything to talk about anymore." Hamlet whimpered again. "You want me to get him?" Archie asked. Hamlet woofed. "Really? You want to see Willie?" The Great Dane panted and woofed some more as Archie's face seemed to grow younger by the minute. The residents of the nursing home were getting quite a kick out of this exchange. "Who's this Willie you're talking about?" asked the blue-haired lady, holding, much to my surprise, a purring Felony on her lap. "I don't remember knowing anybody here named Willie." "You're not talking about William, are you, Archie?" asked a man with thick glasses and an even thicker mustache. Archie just shook his head. "William is a big fellow," he said. No, I'm talking about little Willie. Why, it's no wonder you've missed him. He's only 3 feet tall." I looked at Chester, who had sidled up next to me. "I think," he commented, "we may have reunited Hamlet with a nutcase." But it was a different kind of case that entered the room moments later. A large suitcase on wheels that was covered with stickers and pulled with considerable effort by Archibald Finster, the great Shakespearean actor. Helen and George came in a step behind him to inform us that someone was on the way to see to the animals. I love hearing things like that. It makes meals sit so easily on the tummy. But they didn't rush out of the room. This time they stayed and, like the rest of us, gathered around Archie to find out what the traveling case on wheels had to do with the mysterious Willie. "Let me out of here!" a teeny, tiny voice demanded. It sounded enough like Rosebud to make every hair on my body stand up and salute. "Are you going to behave?" Archie said to the box. Yeah, said the voice. "Come on, Arch. I've been in here for 3 months. Give me some air, huh?" Archie looked around the room. Seeing that everyone's eyes were glued to the case on the floor, he bent down and undid the locks. "Well, it's about time!" The voice grew louder as the top opened. Archie reached in and lifted out. "A dummy," said Helen, peering over Archie's shoulder. "Why, Archie, you never told us you were a ventriloquist." "What's a ventriloquist?" Howie asked Chester. "Ventriloquists," Chester explained, "are people who talk without moving their lips and make it seem as if someone else is doing the talking." "Like Hamlet and Rosebud," I added. Hamlet looked over at me and nodded bashfully. "Say, Arch," Willie said. The dummy was now seated on Archie's knee. "Yes, Willie. Looks to me like you're losing your hair." "It's true, Willie. I just don't know what to do about it." "Yeah, that's a tough decision." "Tough decision? What do you mean?" "To pay or not to pay?" We all laughed, and our laughter encouraged them to go on performing. Archie, I later learned, wasn't really a Shakespearean actor. He just called himself that as part of his act. "But soft, what light through yonder window breaks?" "Romeo and Juliet," Chester whispered to me. "That's no light, Arch," Willie cracked. "That's the sun reflecting off the top of your head." These guys were funny. More than funny, they were good. I guess I should say that Archie was good since he was doing everything. I had to keep reminding myself that Willie wasn't real. After an hour or so of watching them perform, I could see that Hamlet had had a good teacher. No wonder he'd had us all convinced those bones could talk. Just when they were finishing up, "Say goodbye, Willie." "Goodbye, Willie." I noticed Dr. Greenbrier and Jill standing in the doorway, laughing along with the rest of us. Archie noticed them too. His smiling face grew grim when he saw the word Chateau Bow-Wow on Jill's t-shirt. Putting Willie aside, he stood slowly and said, with quiet dignity, "I suppose you have to take them now." Dr. Greenbrier nodded. "I'm sorry," he said. Felony jumped off the lap of the blue-haired lady. "Goodbye, Boopsie," the lady called out sadly. Another woman removed the weasel from where she had him wrapped around her neck. "You brought back some happy memories," she told him. "My husband gave me that coat the first year we were married. I wore it to the opera and to the theater. Oh my, the places we went." She stopped speaking and stroked the weasel lovingly, and then she let him go. One by one, we made our way amid gentle touches and soft goodbyes to the door. Only Hamlet remained at his master's side. Archie looked down at him. "Parting is such sweet sorrow," he said. "We've got to do something," Chester whispered to me. "We can't let Greenbrier take Hamlet. You know what this means." "But what can we do?" I asked. Chester didn't have an answer right away, and as I watched Hamlet walk slowly toward us and saw Dr. Greenbrier turn to open the door, I couldn't help thinking it was too late. And then I saw Chester's eyes light up and I heard him say, "How hard can it be to talk without moving your lips?" He rushed around whispering his plan in all our ears, and a moment later, just as we were about to leave the room for good, the residents of Sunnydale Nursing Home had a paranormal experience. The air was suddenly filled with meowing and whimpering and barking, and it couldn't have been us because our mouths weren't moving at all. The old people looked around the room as if it were suddenly flooded with memories. "Boopsie?" the blue-haired lady said softly. "Is that you?" The man with the glasses and mustache looked around him. "Sparky, are you there, boy?" "Dusty? Whitey? Is that you, Marco? Here, Duke. Come on, lady." And as the room filled with names, Dr. Greenbrier turned to Helen and George and said, "Rules were made to be broken. Don't you think Sunnydale needs a pet?" Helen and George looked at each other, then at Archie, who was the only one not calling a name. He was looking into their eyes, asking without any words for Hamlet to be saved. And they said yes. The rest of our week at Chateau Bow-Wow was fairly uneventful. I say fairly because everything pales when compared to Rosebud and the emotional reunion of Hamlet and Archie. Felony and Misdemeanor were caught trying to break into the food closet the very afternoon we returned from the Sunnydale Nursing Home. And again that evening, and the next morning, and the following afternoon. Where they failed as burglars, however, they did succeed in getting the message across to the management. Our food was finally changed for the better. No more cruel and unusual punishment. Bob and Linda heard at last from Tom and Tracy, a postcard with a view of a snow-covered mountain. "Dear Bob and Linda," it read, "have been mountain climbing in quest of tranquility and the meaning of life. Forgot to bring stamps. Love TNT." Bob and Linda celebrated by having a party. They served Novella Light low cholesterol munchies for your pet. Chester said he was looking forward to getting home. The Weasel spent most of his time writing the platform for an animal rights organization he's founding. He's calling it Weasels into a More Polite Society, or WIMPS for short. I suggested he work on the name. Georgette and I whiled away the hours playing Rip the Rag and reminiscing with Howie about the events leading up to his birth. At first he wanted to hear our stories over and over, but as the week went on he stopped asking for them. Daisy got into the habit of taking him for a walk every afternoon, and he told me he enjoyed these strolls much more than the kind down memory lane. Dr. Greenbrier took the rest of the week off, agreeing with Jill that he'd been working too hard and needed a vacation. As for Chester, well, Chester basked in the glory of being a true hero. He also decided he liked ventriloquism, so I had to put up with a lot of talking water dishes, rubber balls, and tree stumps. It wore a little thin after a while, but then Chester came up with a surprise for the Monroes, and I have to admit, it was worth it just to see the looks on their faces when they arrived to take us home. "Did you hear that?" Toby said, his mouth hanging open. "Do it again," said Pete. Chester winked at me. I said Chester. The two brothers looked at each other. Mr. and Mrs. Monroe just scratched their heads. "Perhaps it's something they ate," said Mrs. Monroe. "We'll have to talk to Dr. Greenbrier." "It's the effects of pollution," said Toby. "Hey, that could be my next science project." Pete shook his head. "I think their brains have been taken over by aliens." Mr. Monroe just kept scratching and didn't say a word. We looked up at them innocently. Howie was laughing so hard he almost gave us away, but the Monroes just thought he was happy to see them. We're back home now and happy to be here. It seems we're not the only ones who had an interesting time while the Monroes were away. Kyle's parents reported some strange incidents involving vegetables during Bunnicula's stay at their house. The Monroes apologized but couldn't offer an explanation. Chester just shook his head. "When are those people going to realize their precious little bunny is a vampire?" he said to Howie and me. "A vampire?" Howie said. He lifted his chin and let out an ear-piercing howl. Chester sighed. I smiled. A dachshund who howls like a werewolf, a vampire rabbit, a dog who meows, and a cat who barks. Things were definitely back to paranormal.